Once the El Gigante's dead, you can pick up any loot and also enter his sleep area, where you can get the rearing log, which I've already talked about. But can I just say how tiny the sleep area is? How can something as big as the El Gigante possibly fit in here? And there are even clotheslines hanging at a height that shouldn't be possible, since the El Gigante would have knocked them over. I don't think they gave this area much thought with its designs. Making our way back to the church, there's another mutated Colmillo. Normally you can skip the vignette and run past it while it's transforming, allowing you to use the emblem to open the church. But if you were in that side area near the lake and you encountered the Colmillos there, the vignette that usually plays for this Colmillo will not happen, so you can't get past the Colmillo fast enough. You'll have to either use a flash grenade or force it to do the jump attack so you can knock it over. Entering the church, Leon calls out to Ashley and says he's here to help. Getting no response, he then solves a puzzle, heads up to the next level, and finds a door. This leads into our next comparison. In Resident Evil 4 OG, Leon opens the door and finds Ashley. Ashley, who's still in a state of panic, throws a stick at Leon, cowers in the corner, and averts her gaze as Leon approaches. Leon reassures her that he is not a threat and that everything will be fine. He holsters his weapon, calmly introduces himself, and then tells her that he's under her father's orders to rescue her. The mention of her father breaks her out of her panic and allows her to trust Leon. Leon then contacts Hunnigan to mention that he's succeeded in extricating his subject. Hunnigan then tells him they will send a chopper to pick him up and relays the coordinates for the extraction point to him. This scene at least showcases how Leon handles prisoners of war, especially younger innocent ones like Ashley, who's 20 years old and has never seen extreme conflict or evil. And when factoring in Resident Evil 2 OG and Darkside Chronicles with how Leon handled Sherry and Manuela, it makes more sense how he attempted to build trust with Ashley. Now let's look at how this scene is handled in Resident Evil 4 Remilk. In Resident Evil 4 Remilk, Leon opens the door and repeatedly calls out to her. Ashley doesn't respond and instead tries to attack Leon with a candelabra directly. I don't really see Ashley as the type to attack someone directly. Her throwing the stick at Leon at a distance in Resident Evil 4 OG better sells her non-confrontational personality. After attacking Leon the first time, she tells him to let her go, still believing he's a threat. Leon tells her to listen, then blocks her second attack, throwing the candelabra away and telling her to be careful with that, like he's a parent dealing with a problem child. He then tries to introduce himself and tell her he's here under the president's orders, but being near the open door, Ashley opts to run, though not towards the way out, but towards the window for some reason. In the same cavalier attitude that he's demonstrated many times already, Leon says, I just had to shake my head at this response. Is that really how he wants to console or reassure a kidnapped victim? For someone who wants to convey that he went through punishing missions that most likely had him come into contact with prisoners of war, you'd think he'd be better at handling such victims. And at this point in my blind playthrough, where I still thought Operation Javier wasn't retconned, I just wondered how after extricating Manuela Hidalgo, who was just as young as Ashley, he wasn't better at handling such victims. The lack of professionalism and inability to provide a sense of security to such victims probably says a lot about Leon's butchered character portrayal in this pre-alpha. It just really comes across like Leon's doing this mission out of annoyance, rather than out of a sense of care with the way the screenplay is handled. Once he leaves the room, he goes to the window where Ashley is. What is it about that window that intrigues her? Is she trying to look out the window to see if there aren't any threats? Why would she do that if she perceived Leon as a close threat that she had to run away from? In fact, is she only perceiving Leon as a threat because she was abducted from campus by Krauser's men, who were likely American? I doubt that. Once Leon gets near her, he then says that it's dangerous outside, which seems odd for him to say that now, considering Ashley chose to go towards the window rather than to the exit, and he didn't even get the chance to fully introduce himself and why he was here. And it just comes across like Leon's a confused parent who doesn't know how to talk to a child or start a conversation that fits the context of their emotional state. Leon once again states that she needs to listen to him, but Ashley then draws attention to the incoming villagers, apparently trusting Leon now for some reason. And the screenplay is just really weird. Like, who wrote these characters for this scene? At this moment, Sadler relays instructions to the villagers through the hive mind, which Leon and Ashley hear and see as well. He tells the villagers to pursue them and deliver salvation onto them since they're escaping. So somehow, Sadler knew immediately that Leon had found Ashley and was in the process of escaping with her. It's funny how he knew this so quickly, yet he couldn't deduce that Ada was in disguise as a white zealot at the start of Separate Ways Remilk. He could have seen through the eyes of one zealot, or noticed through his failure to connect to this white zealot that something was off, but apparently not. That's a definite inconsistency. Once again, do you see what I mean when I say the hive mind is only introduced when the developers find it convenient, and not when it makes sense? Did Sadler only find out they were escaping because Leon and Ashley's plaga sent a sound out that Sadler somehow detected? Can there plagas even do that, or can they only receive signals from dominant plagas? If the plaga can do that, then why doesn't it send out this sound wave at all times when Leon is fighting enemies or sneaking past them? Did Sadler figure out they were escaping through the eyes of the El Gigante or that one Cormillo near the church? I mean, this is just fantasy garbage. Yeah, tell me again how this story is improved in this Remilk, and what is the range of this hive mind anyway? For a bunch of sound waves coming from small organisms, they sure seem to cover miles, which makes no sense. There's a file titled Illuminados 3.2 later on that mentions the signal echoing through the mountains, but how could this be possible? Like, that just makes no sense at all. At least Evelyn could utilize a hive mind process similar to quorum sensing to communicate with E-type mycete deposits that were miles away from the Baker estate, like when Ethan and Mia were on the SS Annabelle. This makes sense for a fungal capability, but not for a parasitic capability. And you know what else doesn't make sense? Why is Sadler speaking in English when he's talking to the villagers? He's supposed to be speaking Spanish if he's addressing the villagers who only know Spanish. If New Capcom is going to focus on small details with the way Leon reloads his weapons or chooses to speak Spanish at the start of this pre-alpha, then you'd think they'd focus on this kind of inconsistency. I mean, this entire scene leaves me chuckling at its poor screenplay and character portrayals. Ashley asks Leon what to do, to which he says that her father trusts him, so she needs to trust him and do exactly as he says so that they can get home safe, which Ashley agrees to. Kinda hard to believe that President Graham would trust Leon if he's going to act all cavalier upon meeting Ashley initially. The mob of villagers enter the church and somehow don't know where Leon and Ashley are, despite knowing where Ashley was being held and being told earlier by Sadler through the hive mind that Leon and Ashley are escaping, but whatever. I'd much rather not be forced to fight these enemies in a poorly put together combat sequence. As we leave, we can also pick up Ashley's broken phone, and she'll act annoyed because she just bought this phone. For a teenager like herself who's the victim of a dangerous cult and in the midst of a BOW incident, she's sure not taking the situation seriously if she's going to make this kind of dumb comment. Why would the developers place this interaction here? This comes across as a tonal inconsistency and an odd choice in pacing. And also, how could her phone possibly be here? Why didn't Krauser take her phone away and safely dispose of it after abducting her? That doesn't make sense. Making their way to the top of the church, Leon drops through the open window and repeatedly tells Ashley to trust him and assures her that he'll catch her. Leon's having to go through quite the trust test with how much he keeps telling Ashley to trust him. I think this is overdoing it at this point. Resident Evil 4 OG's developers didn't make such a big deal about this moment where Leon catches Ashley. It just played out like a regular in-game interaction. But the Remilk's developers decided to put this in purely for fan service. Even the way Ashley falls into Leon's arms and the way she's posed just feels like fan service. And isn't it funny how Resident Evil 4 OG Ashley, who's non-confrontational and prefers throwing things as a form of defense, doesn't hesitate for a second when dropping into Leon's arms, compared to Resident Evil 4 Remilk Ashley, who's so direct in how she confronts a threat like Leon, yet hesitates greatly when dropping into his arms? Talk about another flip in character designs from Resident Evil 4 OG to Resident Evil 4 Remilk. And it's not like this whole trust moment between Leon and Ashley is being used to build them up so that their relationship will mean something by the end, but that's something I'll elaborate on later. Having gotten out of the church, Leon contacts Hunnigan and tells her he's extracted Ashley. Hunnigan then sends the coordinates for the extraction point and tells Leon to hurry up because the weather is apparently getting worse. I'm pretty sure choppers can fly in worser conditions than this, Hunnigan. This then begins the next parts of Chapter 5. I'm sure this may seem like the right time to talk about Ashley's AI and why it's the worst AI system I've ever seen for a title, but I don't think so. Since a lot of Chapter 5 is just stealth, the only things I can say right now is that the command system with Ashley is completely useless and badly programmed, which is why I never use it aside from one optional sequence. You cannot leave Ashley in a safe area so that she doesn't get in the way of the stealth and combat sequences, even though logically any sane developer would put in that kind of design. Ashley's pathfinding is so bad to the point where she lags behind all the time, making you wonder why Leon doesn't hold her hand at all times so that she doesn't lag behind. Ashley can be seen by the enemies during stealth sequences, which makes no sense for an AI system that doesn't allow you to control their movements, like in Resident Evil 4 OG, and the only form of control you have over Ashley is aiming your weapon to force her behind you. The lazy work and brain-dead mentalities put into Ashley's AI designs are indicative of a development team high on drugs when initially designing her. My poor designs of Resident Evil 4 Remilk series has numerous moments where Ashley demonstrates how incompetent she is as an AI system. She really becomes a greater issue once we get to the castle area, but for the time being, she's not that much of a hindrance. We now have to get past the enemies. This stealth section has weird AI since getting spotted by one enemy in the cemetery specifically doesn't alert the other enemies for some reason. And it's pretty simple. Stealth kill the woman, hide behind this rock and aim your weapon to make Ashley get behind you. stealth kill the torch guy in front of you, do a frontal stealth kill on this enemy, hug the right-hand side of this cemetery to get past the enemies, and run past the Molotov guy since his Molotov doesn't deal instant damage. Once you get to the merchant, you'll want to repair your knife. You'll also want to consider upgrading your knife durability as well. We then have this village stealth section, which also has the same AI designs as the church stealth section. Take the right path and drop down, then kill the enemy in this tunnel. Once you climb the ladder, stealth kill the Molotov woman in front of you. Bear in mind, her pathing is really bad. There can be times where instead of continuing her path, she'll turn to the side for no reason and potentially see you. Take this path by the shed and jump over the fence to set up by this building. Perform a frontal stealth kill on this ganado and hope you don't get screwed by bad detection, then take this ladder to progress forward. Try not to run here as you may alert the enemies in the house accidentally. Continue to remain crouched and hug the fence line to the left as you're approaching the enemy that grabs so that he doesn't see you and Ashley. As soon as you're close, do a frontal stealth kill on him, then deal with the torch enemy. For this next section, you can stealth kill the first torch enemy when the enemy on the right isn't looking. You can then stealth kill the enemy on the right. Now, assuming you didn't unlock the door that leads into the barn in chapter 1, you can do this weird strategy of waiting for the brute to set up between the wooden posts, then running to his left-hand side. For some reason, he's very delayed when detecting you. You can then run into the merchant's area to lose the enemies and either continue on or upgrade your loot. This sums up everything regarding the stealth sequences in chapter 5. One other thing you can do is go back to Mendez's manor and access the attic with Ashley. There are plenty of things to collect from here. The first thing is the father's portrait, which I assume is meant to be the village elder before Torres Mendez. I also assume the term father is used to refer to someone related to a church. The next thing is a photo of the factory area that Leon and Luis were held in, which was made in 1992. There's also the picture of Luis and his grandfather, which was dated in 1981. You also get the Village Records Volume 1, where it states that Mendez was granted leadership over the village by the previous elder, likely the one listed in the photograph. He knows Luis and knows he lives with his grandfather by the lake, which ironically is where Luis was held in chapter 1. I don't know why the Illuminados would hold Luis inside his own house. Is this meant to be some kind of poetic irony that the Illuminados were going for? I don't know. Mendez knows that Luis's mother had died when he was born, which was in 1976, since Luis is 28 years old in this pre-alpha. Luis often talked with Mendez about the stories he read, like Don Quixote for instance. It then time jumps to when Luis's grandfather was bitten, which was sometime after 1981. Mendez notes a potential madness among the villagers. I believe this is supposed to be rabies because apparently in Spain and various countries during the 80s and 90s, the term madness was used to refer to rabies colloquially. Of course, the part in Luis's grandfather's journal that mentions him hearing a voice doesn't make sense, since this word choice is connected to a plaga infection or to the black liquid. Apparently, in this Remilk timeline, rabies and the plagas have similar hallucinogenic symptoms for some reason. Did the developers forget about the foaming of the mouth, which is the trademark symptom of rabies? I don't know why the developers had to make the writing confusing in this context. Luis's grandfather pulled Mendez to the side and told him what to do if he should die. Mendez and the villagers then decided to burn down Luis's house, with his grandfather still inside, I believe, as a rudimentary form of sterilization to stop the spread of rabies from Luis's grandfather. Luis then left the village the next day. How he did this is never explained, since it plays out like Luis had no other close relatives to depend on. Not to mention, Luis's grandfather stated that Luis was stuck here, likely because they were poor, and Luis somehow amassed enough money and education requirements to go to university prior to joining Umbrella, and he amassed such psychological resilience to pass himself off as a ladies' man. Where could he have developed his communication skills? None of this makes sense. But during the period of time when Luis was gone, Mendez took the time to create Volume 2 of the Village Records, which was made in 1993, a year after the construction of the factory in 1992. He details some achievements since opening the village up. Based on the way this is written, it makes it seem like he only opened up the village to the outside after Luis ran away. But the thing is, in the canon timeline, before Sadler's rule, I thought the village had always traded with neighboring towns. That's one of the reasons they were harvesting crops and handling livestock in Resident Evil 4 OG. I'm not really sure what the justification for this change is. It seems weird that this village could somehow still be around without trading in goods for money. But some achievements he lists include the procurement of oil for the boats, the construction of the ironworks to make knives and sickles, and the construction of the fish farm. Mendez also taught literacy and mathematics to the children, and also dined with one specific family to talk about their grievances and recent gossip inside his manor, which apparently they helped him build. It then time jumps to when the Illuminados came from the castle to inject the villagers with the plaga, which they said would cure them of their madness/rabies. I'm surprised Sadler wasn't here to assimilate the villagers at this moment. But all this background on Mendez, like with him teaching literacy and mathematics, feels more befitting for Resident Evil 4 OG's Mendez than for Remilk Mendez. Mendez in Resident Evil 4 OG at least had the capacity to think outside of Sadler's will while still remaining loyal to him, whereas Remilk Mendez might as well be another Ganado with how much he doesn't seem to think for himself. I have no doubt there will be later files that offer up contradictions to what has been stated in these files, so we'll just continue on from here. When you do try to leave Mendez's manor, it spawns a mini-boss variant of the Cornmeal called a Savage Mutt as part of a merchant request. This BOW is essentially the same as the other mutated Cornmeal, only it has a lot more life than usual for some reason. You also can't knock it out of the air when it does its jump attack on you for some reason. There's no reason for this BOW to have these kinds of gamey capabilities different from the other same enemy types. I always hate when developers try to justify these parameters by saying, oh, it's a mini-boss. That's a pretty dumb excuse. But while this Savage Mutt has the same problems as the other Cornmeals as well as unjustified capabilities, the strategy for dealing with him is pretty simple and works pretty well. Because of this, I'm not going to be that harsh against this mini-boss. If you do plan to fight this enemy, you'll need at least one flash grenade and plenty of shotgun ammo and knife durability. You'll also want to make sure all of the enemies are dead so that they don't get in the way of this strategy. When you first encounter the Savage Mutt, I recommend stunning it with the flash grenade, then doing the knife execution. Once it recovers, wait for the Savage Mutt to return to a normal state so that it'll be stunned by the shotgun. A lot of its animations are slow when you're close to it, allowing you to stop it with a shotgun blast if it tries to attack. This will allow you to stun lock it effectively. That's the best method I found. By the way, can I just say how dumb it is that Leon says target neutralized, like he's being tasked by a superior in the military to hunt down this Savage Mutt? I would expect him to say some kind of dumb, witty response, not some kind of military phrase. But with the stealth sections, Mendez's manor, and the Savage Mutt covered, it's time to focus on another iconic moment from Resident Evil 4 OG that was reimagined in this Remilk: the cabin sequence. Luis happens to be inside the cabin and calls out to Leon and Ashley to get inside as hordes of Ganado overwhelm them. Leon locks the outer door while Luis locks the inside door. We get a pretty insubstantial conversation with everyone saying nothing, followed by Leon asking pointless questions to Luis. He asks him who he is, which he should already know from the report Hunnigan sent him, and then asks what he's doing here, which I don't understand the context of. Is he asking him what he's doing in this cabin or what he's doing in this village? Is he asking why a former Umbrella researcher is here? I'm assuming this cutscene is being framed around Leon not going to Pretorius Mendez's manor to find those files related to Luis, because if it was framed around Leon going to Mendez's manor, Leon would not be wasting time with these pointless questions. It isn't long before the villagers somehow unlock the outer door from the other side without difficulty, even though Leon applied the deadbolt, and starts swarming them. Luis then tells Leon to lift up a fallen closet because for some reason there's a hole in the wall. How did Luis even know that was there? Did he use that hole to get inside and unlock the inner and outer doors of the cabin, and he made sure to knock over that closet to get away? It doesn't seem like it, because if he did, the three of them could have easily escaped and gotten up to where the gate was, then blocked off the villagers, but that didn't cross his mind at all for some reason. They instead just send Ashley through. The hole looks big enough for all three of them, and there's even a ladder right here for them to get up. If the ladder is right there, why did it take Ashley so long to open the door? Focusing on Leon now, despite not trusting Luis at all, he just casually goes along with Luis's instructions to lift the closet. He doesn't even ask why he needs to lift it up, he just does it like he somehow knew that hole was there. The screenplay and the environmental designs just make the characters' behaviors very perplexing to understand. It's so dumb. At least in Resident Evil 4 OG, they couldn't simply escape from the villagers through some convenient hole, given the fact that the cabin was not set up near some rock wall, so the opportunity for confusing screenplay wasn't possible there. They send Ashley through and decide to hold off the villagers for the time being. Also, on a side note, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but is Luis's game time quote supposed to be a reference to Aliens? Hicks says this line in the movie, so I assume Luis says it here as a reference to that phenomenal horror movie, which may be true. And on that note, can I just say I prefer the way Luis's original voice actor says this line compared to the new voice actor. It's hard to explain why I prefer the original voice actor's line compared to the new actor's line, but ignoring that, we begin the cabin sequence. So this sequence is a weird one for me because I don't know if I like this sequence, hate this sequence, or tolerate this sequence in the Remilk. I guess what I'll do is compare between the original and Remilk versions of this cabin sequence, then talk about my experiences in my blind playthrough through, and then get into the strategy. In Resident Evil 4 OG, this sequence is pretty difficult, and I mean legitimately difficult, not broken. Every shot from your pistol and shotgun mattered, every use of your grenades mattered, and reloading your shotgun when you were trying to push back the enemies came with its own dangers, which I thought was an interesting way to increase the difficulty and be methodical in your approach when using your weaponry. Resident Evil 4 OG's cabin sequence demanded that you use the pistol, shotgun, and grenades as part of its natural flow. Luis was a very useful AI system. He was constantly engaging the enemies, he provided good support, and he could provide you with ammunition, which included pistol bullets and all 3 grenade types. It felt like he had a presence in this encounter. The Ganados in this cabin sequence had a hidden design where only certain Ganado models would transform. This included the guy in the blue shirt and this other enemy. Because this type of pattern could be observed through the normal gameplay and could be made out through scrutinization, that's why I consider this a good design choice that should be classed as a hidden design. The cabin sequence did come with some other problems. First, for some reason, there were moments where the Plagatev Guadagnas would run at you, which is not a part of their fundamental designs. There would also be moments where they would run up to you, then turn around to go back downstairs. Because they could damage you with their passive flail animation, this could be an issue. The Plagatev Guadagnas also had the ability to hit you through geometry, which is a big issue. There were also moments where sometimes when you decapitated an enemy with the shotgun, their attack would still play out and you'd get damaged because they were in the middle of transforming, which was a poor design choice. But despite these issues, I still enjoy the cabin sequence in Resident Evil 4 OG. By the way, for the second phase, when Luis goes upstairs, you'll want to use a flash grenade to kill any plagas on the ground level. When you are using the shotgun on the stairs, you'll want to stay on the left-hand side and stand in a particular spot on the stairs so that the enemies don't think to go up on the second floor and attack you from behind. Even if they do climb up to the second level, Luis can keep them distracted. It works very consistently. You can also take advantage of the camera by putting the enemies off camera so that they can't throw their weapons at you, forcing them to rush you. All of this together, minus the poor designs I've listed, made for a very difficult and hectic encounter. It's not my favorite section, but it's still a good section either way. In Resident Evil 4 Remilk, the cabin sequence is still a timed sequence that is sped up by kills just like the original, but there are some changes worth noting. For one thing, you can actually seal up the windows permanently using wooden boards. During my blind playthrough, I thought these boards could be broken since in the pre-release gameplay, I saw the Brood bust through these boards. The pre-alpha doesn't communicate to you properly that these boards are permanent. I get that the wooden boards in Resident Evil 2 Remilk couldn't be broken by zombies, but the context in which the wooden boards were used in that game is different to this pre-alpha, which justified my initial confusion. The first set of wooden boards is given initially. The second set of boards is given to you after you kill the initial enemies and kill 1 or 2 members of the reinforcements once they're inside, or after you wait about 4 minutes and kill an enemy. You do have to be careful though. Sometimes if you kill a bit too many of the reinforcements when they're outside, the boards don't spawn immediately if you kill one of them when they're inside. The third set of wooden boards is inconsistent with when it spawns as well. I don't know what parameters I have to bear in mind or what sort of weird programming I have to account for in order to make them spawn more consistently. Beyond only one of these windows is an explosive barrel that can be very hard to see in your initial playthroughs. This barrel can be helpful if a lot of enemies stack by this window. Luis does absolutely nothing during the sequence. At best, the only thing he'll really do is distract some enemies. In fact, the way the Ganados prioritize Luis is badly programmed. There are many times where they will walk towards you and then choose to go after Luis, so you can get those moments where enemies will sprint at you before circling around to go after Luis. They'll stun you, and this opens you up to being hit. There are also a lot of moments where the enemies just stand around and do nothing for way longer than usual, then they'll attack you. But back to Luis, he only shoots once every 10 seconds it feels like. And the times where he can get in the way when I'm trying to get to a window, or the times where he shoots an enemy that I'm trying to let inside to get loot or wooden boards, is made more annoying because of his tendency to not do anything. In the event that enemies do prioritize him, you can actually get behind them and do a knife execution if they're close to him and are in a normal state. Luis has absolutely no presence in this encounter, and he wants to say it's a horde of them versus the 2 of us, when in actuality it's just 1 of us. To describe the group programming of the enemies, the first group of enemies has a property tailored to them, where if there are at least 3 enemies alive, the reinforcements will take even longer to spawn in. This also holds for the second group of enemies that spawn in, who are not the reinforcements. You'll know the reinforcements have spawned in after 4 minutes have passed, or you've killed the required number of enemies for them to spawn. Their spawn is indicated by a Ganado calling you and Luis out, followed by torchlights in the corners of the cabin's exterior, and a large group of enemies converging converging on you. The first two groups of enemies will only transform into Plaga-type Desgrenados. They'll only transform if you don't headshot them or if their heads don't pop after the headshot. Once the reinforcements come in, you'll start getting Plaga-type Guadañas. The same problems with the Ganados back in the village intro are still here, so you can imagine how bad this sequence can be if you have many Ganados inside of the cabin. And when the shotgun is as unreliable as it is at crowd control, this sequence can become messy. Yet despite all this, during my blind playthrough, this sequence didn't feel like it had any energy. It felt like a lax sequence given how sluggish I was, how much the enemies stood around, how much I was initially shooting enemies with the pistol from the stairs to save up on shotgun ammo, and how much the sequence didn't feel complementary to the pre-alpha systems. Whenever I did use the shotgun, if I was getting consistent decapitations and then out of the blue, this one Ganado survived a headshot, it would just fatigue me even more. This section did not feel as exciting or as hectic as Resident Evil 4 OG's cabin sequence, and how could it be when it has poor fundamental gameplay foundations? I wasn't feeling a sense of imagination with this entire section. I really didn't know what to feel with this section aside from negativity, and it didn't help that the sequences prior to this cabin sequence were awful. There was also a lot of confusion with whether this was a kill-based sequence or a time-based sequence during my blind playthrough. You can imagine how much of a slog this entire section was during my blind playthrough. I still hold some of those feelings towards the Remilk's cabin sequence today. At least now, I have a strategy for approaching the sequence that is built around keeping the enemies out of the cabin most of the time. I can't even tell if this is intentional or not, but let me describe it. Before starting this sequence, you'll want to have a good amount of shotgun ammo, knife durability, at least 2 grenades, and 1 flash grenade for backup. The pistol has no utility here, though that's probably for the better given how bad the later sequences of the pre-alpha are. When the cabin sequence begins, you'll want to immediately board up this isolated window. You'll then want to use your shotgun to decapitate the enemies trying to break through this window. This pre-alpha doesn't indicate that you can shoot through the window without destroying it by avoiding hitting the vertical mountain on the window that separates the glass. Shooting through the glass specifically prevents the window from being destroyed. I know this seems self-explanatory, but many games often destroy windows entirely, even if you're shooting through one section of the window. By doing this, you can kill them and halt the enemy's progress. Try to make sure you don't shoot the explosive barrel beyond this window so that you can save it for later. After going back and forth shooting the enemies through these 2 windows, the reinforcements will spawn in. As soon as they do, you'll want to immediately destroy the leftmost window and kill 1 Ganado inside the cabin. Most likely, it'll spawn the second set of wooden boards, allowing you to board up the leftmost window. By the way, if you perform a ground execution on an enemy about to transform, they don't seem to drop wooden boards. After that, you'll then want to use the explosive barrel to get rid of the enemies crowding around the window. Then kill any Ganados that enter the cabin to eventually get the 3rd set of wooden boards. Like I said before, the 3rd set of wooden boards spawns inconsistently, so you may get moments where in the middle of getting the wooden boards, an enemy will fall down the chimney and ambush you, requiring your immediate attention. Once the 3rd set of boards are in place and the first enemy that comes down the chimney has been dealt with, the next phase begins. By the way, the enemies that fall down the chimney can be killed by a knife execution from behind while they're recovering. I find it odd that it works this way, yet enemies that are recovering from a general drop-down animation cannot be executed from behind unless you shoot them to make them flinch in a certain way while they're recovering. New Capcom's bizarre logic never ceases to make me shake my head in confusion. But back to this phase, you'll want to get upstairs before the cutscene triggers in order to set up for the enemies climbing to the 2nd floor. The reason you'll want to do this is to ensure that there aren't many Ganados on the bottom level when you're trying to kill the brute. Once at least 5 enemies have been killed, the brute should spawn in from the isolated window and break down the barrier. This is where the 2 grenades, knife executions, and backup flash grenades are needed because he has so much life. But don't just use your grenades immediately when he mantles through the window. New Capcom's lackadaisical nature shows itself once again, because when this brute is in the middle of mantling and also slightly after he finishes his mantle animation, he cannot be stunned by grenades. How on earth do you miss something as obvious as this? It makes absolutely no sense. Once again, either New Capcom's QA department was acting incompetent, or fixing this kind of issue would clash with the director's vision of supposedly good game design, or they think these kinds of artificial problems are good design. It's so stupid. But to kill the brute here, you need to throw a grenade and make sure it explodes in such a way that it hits him when he fully recovers and also pushes him into the wall behind him. For the latter case, this can mess up. I don't know why, but the parameter that governs what direction the brute flinches towards when hit by a grenade is weird. There are times where I throw a flash grenade, do the knife execution, and throw a normal grenade to push him into a wall, and he flinches in the wrong direction. I assumed originally that flash grenades had an impact on the direction parameter, but that's not true, as rarely you can get moments where the brute flinches the wrong way even without using the flash grenade. This is one of the times where you have to wonder why the shotgun can't knock back this brute in the same manner as the grenades. In Resident Evil 5, the shotguns could push back the big man Maginis, and the direction parameter was never clunky. They were always pushed away from you whenever you use the shotgun. If the shotgun could push back the brutes, you would not be getting these moments where the direction parameter screws up. Let me remind you, the director of Resident Evil 5 directed this pre-alpha. But back to this section, assuming you did place your grenade correctly and didn't get screwed by this clunky parameter, the brute will be pushed into the wall, allowing you to do the knife execution. Throw another grenade in the same position to flinch him into the wall, do the knife execution, hit him with a couple of shotgun blasts, and he'll die. The only RNG parts are the direction parameter screwing with you and enemies coming through the same window as the brute. If they come in through the window, this can get messy. Once the brute is dead, the cutscene that ends this sequence will occur after a few seconds. Normally, when the brute is alive, it takes a very long time for the cutscene to trigger, so you can see why killing the brute is paramount. And after explaining all that, I can definitely say that Resident Evil 4 Remilk's cabin sequence is worse than Resident Evil 4 OG's cabin sequence based purely on the unjustified RNG due to poor programming, the random enemy behavior, the gaming of the system with shooting enemies through windows and using grenades in a clumsy manner, etc. And a vast majority of the people who voted on my poll regarding the cabin sequence agree with me. Ashley, after taking an unusually large amount of time to open the door, even though getting to the door should have taken no time at all and there didn't seem to be a visible lock on the door, calls out to Leon and Luis. The three of them escape and lock the gate behind them. Ashley then starts coughing up blood, something that Luis recognizes as an early symptom of a plaga infection. He then starts explaining to Leon and Ashley that everything that has happened to the villagers is the result of a plaga, and they have plagas inside of them. These symptoms are only the beginning, but luckily for them, since the plaga is still in the early stages of development, it can be removed with a surgical procedure. You would assume at first that he was talking about the special radiation device similar to a linear accelerator, but he shows his chest to reveal an incision. The incision and removal of the egg is never mentioned again in this Remilk, so I don't know why this incision was included. Leon and Ashley never needed an incision when they used the special radiation device, so why was it different with Luis? In Resident Evil 4 OG, the suppressant was capable of destroying plaga eggs itself as a form of retroactive abortion, since the plagas weren't fully developed at this point. It was only when the plagas hatched that the suppressant only served to slow its growth rather than kill it, which makes sense. But it seems, in this Remilk, the suppressant can't even destroy unhatched eggs. They instead attribute the destruction of the egg to the administration of antigen. And the thing I don't understand is why Luis's incision is on his chest. The plaga attaches itself to the spinal cord, and the eggs are normally injected into the neck area. It doesn't make sense to make an incision in the chest. Who even made the incision in the first place when Luis was unconscious? There wasn't a researcher working for the Illuminados that trusted Luis. Did an AI system do it? How could Luis possibly input the commands for the surgical procedure into a computer and then rush into the chair to get the procedure? There's no way that's possible, unless it was on an initial timer allowing him to get in the seat. This chest incision and the changes to the suppressant are questionable, and why Luis doesn't tell Leon about the suppressant right here is confusing. Luis even acknowledged in Separate Ways Remilk that he used the suppressant on himself, so I'm guessing he used it, then got the egg removed through his chest somehow. But then that begs the question of how long the suppressant's effects last, because Luis clearly used it on himself before the events of Separate Ways Remilk, as the Illuminados weren't in the process of injecting him with another plaga egg. Then, I believe a couple of hours later, when Luis was captured alongside Leon, he also wasn't injected with a plaga egg. In fact, if the suppressant doesn't have an effect on the plaga, even when it's in egg form, then it shouldn't matter that Luis took the suppressant beforehand, because the egg should be able to grow inside of Luis even when the suppressant is in his system. So then this begs the same question again. Why didn't the Illuminados inject Luis with a plaga egg when he was captured in chapters 1 and 2? This is a pretty big inconsistency if the developers haven't addressed the effects of the suppressant on the plaga eggs. But regardless, if Luis had used the suppressant on himself, why doesn't he consider it important to tell Leon right now? That's a bit odd. Leon then agrees to work with Luis, which then prompts Luis to start walking away. Leon then tries to question him, but doesn't try to repeat the same questions he was trying to address to Luis earlier. He instead asks why Luis is helping them, to which he says in a rushed and casual manner,
"Because it makes me feel better. Let's leave it at that."
This is different in tone compared to how Luis said this line in chapter 3-1 of Resident Evil 4 OG.
Why are you... It makes me feel better. Let's just leave it at that.
At least Luis sounded concerned for their health here. And what's weird with Remilk Luis is he sounds so carefree, yet in Separate Ways Remilk, when the suppressant gets destroyed, he showcases a lot of despair at not being able to help Leon and Ashley. I'm just amazed he's trying to show concern, given how much Leon has been hostile to him. I don't know, it just reads like flippant character writing. Luis then says he will contact them later with his radio. Why Leon and Ashley don't follow him when they agreed to work together, they found out about the plagas inside of them, they found out about the surgical procedure, and this path being the only way to go is confusing. What could Leon and Ashley possibly be doing? At least in Resident Evil 4 OG, Luis awkwardly mentioned that he forgot something and told Leon and Ashley to continue on without him for now, so that's somewhat acceptable. But anyway, this concludes Chapter 5. Now, there is a cutscene between Luis and Ada that plays at the start of Chapter 6, but I'll reserve it for when we get to Separate Ways Remilk. Leon gets a call from Hunnigan, who says that with the weather like this, the chopper can't make its approach. I'm sorry, in what way is this light rain shower considered a hazard for flying a helicopter? Military helicopters have flown in far worse conditions than this. That's what they're designed to do. Why such a dumb change? In Resident Evil 4 OG, the helicopter was shot down by Sattler's Ganados, and we know they have the means to do that. And because of this, the US government was delayed in sending another helicopter, clearly underestimating the capabilities of this cult. Now, like little Johnny, they can't do anything until this light weather clears. Are you serious? What a joke. Being unable to stand by until the weather clears, Leon tells Hunnigan that they will find someplace safe instead. Ashley voices her concerns about what will happen to her, even though Luis literally said minutes ago that they will turn into ganados, which then prompts Leon to focus their attention on getting out of here. They then progress forward into the quarry area. If you go inside of this merchant area, you'll find a note from him that says the plagas are vulnerable to sunlight and flash grenades. Why would they have such an important lore point and mechanic be told from a non-diegetic gameplay mechanic given human form? That's so weird. That really says a lot about how much they don't value their own lore. The merchant then says that he keeps a couple of flash grenades on him at all times, which is funny because whenever the enemies are near him, he just starts cowering like a child. Look at the merchant! He's holding his hands up, he's scared! And dude, you're supposed to have flash grenades with you. Remember that one conversation I had with you? You were explaining that you had a couple of flash grenades with you. Why are you cowering like this? Where's your stockpile of weapons that you've somehow accrued? Because you're a gameplay mechanic given human form with the most absurd capabilities ever. Why are you cowering like this with your hands up? We now need to sneak through this quarry, which has a weird layout to this encounter. You have two Molotov enemies up top, a couple of regular Ganados, a crossbow Ganado, and a Ganado that for some reason, on his regular patrol route, always walks into a bear trap. Why is that? Was the stealth so much of an afterthought that they haphazardly put together this Ganado's walk path? I shake my head at such a design, and the point where he gets trapped in this bear trap can vary. But this section feels like it was designed for a weapon like the sniper rifle. They even give you rifle ammo before this moment. It feels like they want you to snipe the Molotov enemies, then deal with the guys on the ground stealthily. If this is the fundamental design the developers favored, why would they lock the sniper rifle inside of the merchant? You don't design a section a certain way unless you're ensuring the average player has access to specific weapons at all times. Buying a weapon makes it seem like that weapon is optional, which doesn't complement this section design. And I get that the sniper rifle in the scope only costs 16,000 pesetas, which is relatively cheap in the grand scheme of things, but it would have been more practical to replace the Red 9 with the sniper rifle in Chapter 4, and it wouldn't have felt so weird as well. And even when using the sniper rifle, there are those moments where the enemies don't get killed by a headshot, and I highly doubt they designed this section to be done with just the pistol. Why would any rational developer make you stand far away and play around with focusing your reticle, dealing with weapon sway, and dealing with projectile-based weaponry not built for long distances, to lead to fatiguing gameplay? Not to mention, the noise you make shooting your pistol can draw the enemy's attention, and if you get seen before reaching a certain threshold of this area, reinforcements will spawn in. That's what the face validity of this section seems to be. There's also a random bug with this section where sometimes when stealth killing this female Ganado, you get seen out of nowhere, even though no one is looking at you or seeing you. Let me tell you guys, this bug was such a problem in my initial playthroughs that I could not find the incentive to do stealth. The only other thing contributing to the lack of incentive at the time was the HP for the Bella sisters, and the number of enemies I had to deal with that would potentially drain me of ammo for the later sequences. It got got to the point where I was trying to get an enemy to grab Ashley and take her near the way out so that I could kill the enemy and take Ashley with me, but I'm sure you can imagine how little that was working, especially with the reinforcements and Ashley's incredibly sluggish, lazy AI. By the way, the pathing on the enemies when they're taking Ashley is hilarious. It's like they're completely drunk with how much they turn around, bump into walls, and move in a circle. But you know the most retarded thing of all? Whenever the enemies grab Ashley, you cannot shoot them once to make them drop her. You have to shoot them a random amount of times in order for them to drop her. Not even a high-powered weapon like the sniper rifle can help. It'll still take almost 3 shots from the sniper rifle for them to let her go. The developers wanted to put such an emphasis on awkward, artificial, gamey, squirrely gameplay if they're seriously not going to do something as simple as change the stun threshold whenever the enemies grab Ashley. The enemies aren't tightening their defenses, they're not paying attention to you, they're busy holding up Ashley. There is no reason for them to shrug off bullets like this. How does that complement the survival horror aspect? How does this make the pre-alpha scary? I can't even begin to tell you how much this design leads to broken gameplay and only serves to complement the already pathetic AI system that governs Ashley's movements and responses. I've never seen an AI system in other badly thought out designs like with this random stun system in any other game out there, especially with a supposedly AAA title like Resident Evil 4 Remilk. Like I said, new Capcom has redefined what it means to be an incompetent development team by re-establishing that baseline, and I can't help but feel like they left the stun systems like this as a way to express their annoyance with fans who wanted a way to execute enemies when they grabbed onto Ashley in Resident Evil 4 OG. That mechanic of executing enemies with a knife when they grab Ashley does exist in Resident Evil 4 Remilk, but to screw with the players who wanted that animation, they made the stun systems awkward when trying to save Ashley, and this impacts not only those players, but all other players of Resident Evil 4 Remilk, and good luck relying upon this knife execution in Chapter 7, but I'll talk about that later on. Back to the stealth section, it's clear the designs with this section don't make any sense, as well as the tendency for the enemies to see you when they can't see you. Aside from trying to get the enemies to grab Ashley and take her near the exit, I was also trying to use the third-person cover trick to shoot the enemies without them seeing me. Ironically, it was through the broken designs present in this section that I ended up figuring out how in certain stealth sections the enemies don't go into a combat status when shot, and that your shots could attract enemies. So I'm sure you're thinking of stealth killing the first 2 enemies, then shooting the enemies on the ground, then shooting the Molotov enemies, but the problem is, the ground enemies and the Molotov enemies can transform. Because of this, you'll likely not have time to stop the ground enemies from spotting you, or you'll burn through too much ammo. The latter is important because of how much the later sequences drain you of ammunition, which is why I stress upon this. Therefore, you pretty much have 3 approaches to the sequence. The first approach is buying the sniper rifle, stealth killing the first 2 enemies, going up top to this spot, shooting this Molotov enemy, shooting the 2 Ganados that heard the noise, then shooting the last Molotov enemy. In this case, the RNG involves enemies mutating or surviving the shots. The second approach is to stealth kill the first 2 enemies, hide behind this wall, try to kill the 2 ground enemies with a third-person cover trick with your pistol, then kill the Molotov enemies. An important thing to note is that the third-person cover trick only works with pistols. It doesn't work with larger weapons like a shotgun or sniper rifle. Leon just raises the weapons up for some reason. Quite a strange inconsistency. The RNG with this approach is the same as the first approach, but riskier because of how close you are to the ground enemies. The final approach, which is the approach I always use to save up on ammo and speed up the sequence, is I stealth kill the first 2 enemies, hug the right-hand side as I make my way to the side path, pay attention for when the torch Ganado starts to walk into the bear trap, assuming he didn't walk into it already. If he did walk into it, I just wait until he starts walking away, aim my gun to make Ashley line up against the wall, then continually move forward while still pushing into the wall. The reason I do this is to decrease the chances of the Molotov enemy spotting me, because even though there is a platform above me that she theoretically shouldn't be able to see through, she can still see me at times. You're essentially trying to get past a certain threshold so that when you do get spotted, the reinforcements will be unable to spawn. The wall I push up against serves as the best reference point for when I need to sprint and still push up against it. Once that's done, I then hug the right-hand side to avoid the bear traps, Molotovs, and crossbow Ganado. Ashley never gets hit or steps in a bear trap every time I've done this. This approach is my preference, with the only RNG part being whether the Molotov enemy spots me too quickly or not, but that may be due mostly to my timing when initiating my sprint. If you do this method, bear in mind that if you go back beyond the reinforcements threshold, they'll spawn in, but this ends this really dumb sequence.